The heroes have gathered together to face death itself, the Misty Flower crew and their leader known as the Immortal, a man who cannot die. A berserker player named Yunha lived to destroy monsters. That was the whole point of his existence. He and his team descended into one of the 8 black dungeons of the world, the Abyss. No one had ever gone that far before. Many monsters were destroyed there, but many more remained to be slain. But Yunha knew neither rest nor sleep. All he cared about after defeating each monster was which monster to defeat next. And in the Abyss, there was plenty to choose from. It seemed that there were so many possible opponents that it was impossible to remember each one, and not even necessary. The hero fought bravely. He did not yet know that in this dungeon his life of 32 years would come to an end. He crushed one creature with his sword and was already preparing for the next fatal blow, putting all his strength and power into each of them. Behind him were mountains of slain monsters, but Yunha did not look back, moving forward without stopping. And this was a mistake, because the threat was lurking where no one expected it. The monster swung its powerful spiked tail. Yunha felt movement from behind just when it was too late to dodge the blow. After the hero lost his balance, he did not have time to block the next attack. The monster's sharp teeth sank into the hand holding the sword. The confrontation lasted for several minutes. The armor protected the young man well, but the pressure of the monster's jaw became stronger and stronger. At that moment, another blow of the tail followed, and now our hero was unable to stay on his feet. He staggered and began to fall. The stones flew in all directions, but Yunhei managed to free his hand with the weapon and strike back. The monster's head flew high into the air. Another enemy was defeated only to give way to the next one. The new monster was much larger and more terrifying. One of its limbs resembled a huge mace with spikes. When he got a better look at his enemy, Yunha realized that the monster's second arm was no less dangerous. The monster's mouth opened and it let out a terrifying roar. Its teeth were suspiciously similar to human teeth. Could it really be a mutant that once lived among people? Our hero was not prone to sentimentality. He saw a threat, and all he was interested in was how to get rid of it as quickly as possible and move on. But Yunha struck with his sword, but immediately realized why the monster's teeth were not sharp, but wide. The enemy simply clamped the blade like a vice. The sword was broken under the pressure of the jaws. The hero cursed and began to think about how best to act in this situation. He jumped up and pushed off the monster's back with his legs to jump further away, increasing the distance. Upon landing, Yunha sent a wave of splashes around him, defeating so many monsters that the entire ground was covered in pools of blood. Even though the weapon was broken, it was still possible to fight for one's life and fight with the remaining part of the blade. But Yunha enveloped it in mana, which made the fragment much stronger, while the monster gained momentum for an attack. Despite its incredible size, the monster was quite fast and agile, and the distance was reduced very quickly. Our hero's broken sword, glowing blue, floated in the air, transformed into a powerful weapon and ready to deliver its final blow. The monster was huge, but Yunha calculated the trajectory of his sword correctly and hit his opponent in the neck, the most vulnerable spot. The blade entered the creature's body up to the hilt, bloody streams gushed from its mouth, and a monstrous roar almost deafened the hero. With a sharp movement, Yunha pulled his weapon out of the dead carcass and turned around to assess the situation around him. There were no new opponents in sight, and the young man happily inhaled as much air as he could, checking to see if his ribs were intact. Not long ago, he had fallen hard on his back. It was necessary to assess the situation behind him, but Yunha looked back. His eyes lit up with fire. It was a special vision. The hero saw that behind him were not only the defeated monsters, but also the other hunters who had descended into the dungeon with the team. All were dead. Well, if there was no one else to help, Yunha decided to help himself and began looking for a new sword to continue his journey forward. A suitable blade was found quite quickly. With its help, one could try to pass through the stone gates towering in front of the warrior. It didn't matter. But Yunha was determined to overcome the obstacle and defeat the dungeon boss, even if he was alone. What this boss would be like could be guessed from the stone images of monsters on the gates. Our hero headed straight towards them. He pushed his sword into the crack, making it a little wider, and then used his hands to push the gate apart enough to walk through. Then the rocks continued to move on their own, and the hunter resolutely entered where no man had ever entered before. There was nothing there but dense, impenetrable darkness. The light coming through the gate was only enough for a few meters. But Yunha assessed this impenetrable darkness and realized that the boss, the master of darkness, was definitely hiding right here, nearby. Suddenly, the young man's eyes widened in horror. He realized that he had made an unforgivable mistake by underestimating his opponent. The master of darkness was also looking at him. The attack was so swift that the hero did not even understand how it happened. He was already falling backwards with a fatal wound in his chest. The numerous rocks, one of which had pierced Yunhe's body, flew back at a terrifying speed under the impact of the powerful force of the blow. The hero was turned upside down several times. He was completely helpless. The weapon fell from his hands. Blood flew in all directions. The movement did not stop. Falling to the ground, no Yuna realized that this was the end. He couldn't move even the tip of his finger. The hero laughed ominously. He didn't expect to die so stupidly. The player's last thoughts were that humanity was not yet ready to fight the Master of Shadows. He was too strong. The hero sat in a pool of blood, leaning against a rock, and thought that it wasn't so bad to meet his death in a dungeon where no one had ever reached. Here, he heard a deafening cry full of despair. The girl ordered Yunhei not to even think about dying. She cursed and scolded him, urging him not to give up. It was Li Yuan. Our hero looked at her and thought that it was a hallucination. She could not have survived, and even more so, to be nearby so deep in the dungeon. The girl was a good magician. Tears were running down her face, but her hands were doing their job. She was casting a healing spell. Kneeling over Yunhei, Li Yuan tried her best to close his wound, but it was a huge hole in his stomach, and the task was impossible. The hero realized that he had no chance of surviving, so he asked his friend to leave him and quickly save his own life. Yen screamed at the guy to shut up immediately and not interfere with her doing her job. She needed to convince him that there was hope. In fact, the wounds were too serious, and no healing would help restore the internal organs in such a situation. It could only be a miracle. At this time, Yunha thought that he had already died and entered the afterlife. He did not yet know that a miracle had happened. The guy regretted leaving his partner alone in the dungeon and asked her for forgiveness. He had dedicated his entire life to destroying monsters, caring little about others. He also remembered Baekryun, a girl who had just entered adulthood, and Yunha mentally thanked her for seeing only the best in him. His partner, Li Yuan, attempted to transport the hunter back in time to save his life. This was the miracle she was hoping for and bringing it to life. There was a limit to time travel, but the girl didn't care what price she had to pay for it. And a miracle happened. The desire to save his partner was so strong that he was soon swallowed up by a stream of yellow radiance to take him away from the darkest dungeon forever. This radiance became blinding, and it was no longer possible to make out anything. And this is how miracles of the great power of desire are accomplished. Some people were standing over him and holding out a rattle. They called him by name and asked him to look at them. Our hero decided that he was hallucinating again. Yunha opened his eyes and tried to focus. It was his mother and father. They smiled happily that their son had woken up. The baby wanted to tell his parents a lot, but he was barely a month old, so all he could do was coo. While the mother reproached the father for waking the baby, our hero tried to understand why the afterlife looked like his room as a baby. Mom and Dad looked at the baby again and affectionately asked if he had woken up to look at them. The child reached out and grabbed the woman's little finger tightly, as if he was checking to see if she was real or not. She tenderly asked how long he wanted to hold her hand, while her father plaintively reminded her that he also had hands, and as many as 10 fingers, and it seemed he was a little jealous. Our hero realized that this was not the afterlife, but that he was in the body of a child, and he could not yet speak or even move. He didn't die. He went back in time to when he was only a month old. Yunha continued to hold his mother's finger and thought that this was simply impossible. He realized that Yuan had performed a miracle right before his death. The impossible had happened against all laws. The girl was equal in power to the 12 thrones. It was no wonder that she had succeeded. The parents continued to discuss which of them their son looked more like. He had his father's smile and his mother's eyes. The child looked at them sadly with an adult look. Yunha did not think that he would ever see his parents alive again, but it happened. They died when he was 6 years old. They were killed by monsters. Since then, the boy saw the meaning of his existence in the destruction of monsters. But thanks to Yuan, he had a second chance, so No Yunha vowed that this time he would be able to change the future. He was so determined that he even clenched his fist, but it was the fist of a 1-year-old child, whose parents almost cried with emotion and began to take pictures of their son. Even though our hero retained the memory of his life, he still remained a child, and therefore had very limited opportunities, which was unbearable. All his tasks were reduced to eating well and sleeping. Such torture continued day after day. He had to come up with at least some kind of activity for himself. Given a second chance, Yunha started his journey almost from the beginning, and the first task he gave himself was to simply turn over. While he was trying to practice this simple action several times, his older sister Yuna came up and began to encourage the little one. Yuna was 4 years older than our hero and loved him more than anyone in the world, which meant she spent a lot of time with her little brother. Our hero was surprised that his memories of his sister were much weaker than those of his parents, but he remembered one moment from the past in detail. On the day their mom and dad died, Yuna hugged her brother tightly and promised him that she would always be there for him no matter what happened. On the day the monsters killed their parents, the sister hugged Yunhu tightly and promised him that everything would be fine. She repeated this phrase hundreds of times until her voice began to disappear. In his new second life, the boy, to Yuna's joyful cries, finally made a coup and consolidated his success with another attempt. The girl grabbed him in her arms and continued to praise him. Our hero had not received so much tenderness and love for a long time. At the age of 9 months, Yunha was already sitting confidently, and he was able to see and notice more, and he discovered that mana was all around him. As an adult, the hero constantly experienced a mana deficit, so he decided to start saving it now to create a reserve while his body allowed it. From the outside, it looked rather strange, and my sister asked him what interesting thing he was doing. The boy looked at her, not knowing how to explain, since he still couldn't talk, and then he noticed something interesting. Yuna was like a sponge, soaked in mana that there was so much of it that sometimes the glow went beyond the boundaries of her body, creating a shining silhouette, like a shadow. While she was lifting the baby into her arms, the hero thought that such an amount of mana for an adult would be dangerous and threatening to health. It could end in pyknosis. While the girl was teaching him to walk, Yuna thought about how he needed to teach her to control her energy before it put her life at risk. At the age of 4, our hero began to fulfill this task, because by this time he had already learned to speak well and move confidently, and also often spent time playing with his sister on the street. She was very sociable and kind to everyone, and although many did not like the gloomy Yunhu, Yuna still continued to take her little brother with her everywhere. The children in the yard always happily invited the girl to join the game. She was cheerful and very inventive. Unlike her brother, the girl got along well not only with children, but also with adults. The neighbors were simply delighted with her. Yunhee's communications with others were completely different and rarely brought pleasure to both parties. One day, he and his sister went out for a walk, and a slightly older girl with crimson hair called out to the boy. She blocked his path and looked at him defiantly, as if waiting to see if Yunha would rise to the provocation or not. Everyone liked to tease him. The girl asked why he had come there. Without thinking twice, our hero explained that he had been dragged there, but that it did not concern her, Drain Minzi, in any way. The girl got really angry and shouted that she had asked him not to call her that 1,000 times. Kim Minji, that's her name. Yunha pretended that he didn't hear again. The kids on the playground suggested playing Cossacks and robbers because there were quite a lot of kids there, and Minzi continued to be indignant. Yunha was not delighted. He did not understand at all why he needed to spend time in such company at 32 plus 4 years old, but for the sake of his sister, he endured. Yuna was very happy when she managed to drag him to the playground and even play together. This time was no exception. Noticing the displeasure on her brother's face, she decided that the problem was that he was not familiar with the rules of the game, so she cheerfully began to explain. Our hero didn't listen. He was simply pleased to see his sister's smile. He had been deprived of this pleasure for many years. The children had a pretty good time together and only went home when the sun began to sink towards the horizon. Yunha was unhappy that he got so dirty during the game. His clothes looked like he had dug a trench. Yuna continued to have fun and said that it was not scary. The main thing was that they had fun, wasn't that right? She asked. The brother muttered that that was true, but he didn't like walking around the city like that. It would be better to stop and tidy himself up a bit. They would have had to stop in any case. A very angry mutant dog appeared in the middle of the street. It bared its teeth, drooling from its mouth. The girl froze in fear, but still stood a little ahead of her brother in order to protect him with herself in case of an attack. The children froze, not moving, and the dog, with flashing red eyes, came closer and closer to them, preparing to attack. It was difficult to figure out whether it was just a feral dog or an animal with rabies, or a real mutant that had escaped control. Yuna tried to cover her brother with her hand again, but Yunha was completely calm and didn't even take his hands out of his pockets. The girl was very scared but tried not to show it so as not to scare her brother. She tried to assure him that everything was okay. Our hero remembered how on her last day of life she did the same thing, calming him down so he wouldn't be afraid, promising that everything would be fine. Now Yuna's face was just as worried and full of concern for Yunhu as it had been then. He decided that this time he would not allow trouble to happen. The boy looked at the dog with his childish eyes, and the man in his head was considering whether he had the right to use his magical skills. Finally, the decision was made, and Yunha placed his hand on his sister's forearm, covering it with her body so that she would not be afraid. He stepped forward decisively, causing some confusion in Yuna. She did not understand what was happening and why her brother was doing this. Yunha thought that in that life he was weak and just trembled in his sister's arms. But now everything will be completely different. It's time to change his destiny. The boy took another decisive step forward to avoid the mistakes of the past in his new life. He was so confident in his abilities that Yuna did not interfere. She simply stood behind her brother and watched what was happening. The boy cast a defensive spell, using up almost all of his mana, and the dog sensed the threat and stopped. There was so much energy in the air that the animal did not risk attacking. Receiving such a rebuff from a child was something new for her. The mouth opened and closed again, then opened again, but not to bite, but to catch its breath, knocked out by fear. Using the power of suggestion, Yunha commanded the creature to immediately get out of their way, or better yet, to disappear immediately. The animal didn't have to be told twice. The dog quickly turned around and began to run away from this sudden threat. The children watched as the dog ran away into the darkness of the gateway. Yuna didn't understand how her brother managed to do this. Having weakened the protective barrier, Yunha breathed a sigh of relief. In the body of a child, he used magic for the first time and was not at all sure that he would be able to use his skills from his past life successfully. Yuna was shocked. She saw the blue glow of the spell and heard her brother's sigh, so the first thing the girl asked was if he was okay. Yunha answered in the affirmative, He hastened to reassure his little sister, saying that their adventure had turned out to be fun. The girl calmed down and began to ask how her brother did it, whether it was mana, and when he would teach her to do such tricks too. Our hero was a little puzzled, but then decided that this was exactly the reaction of his sister that he should have expected. The moment was quite touching. He pretended to be tired and promised to teach Yuna, which caused a new wave of joy and gratitude towards him. Yun smiled and thought that why not, after all, he was going to prepare his sister for the upcoming events anyway. The girl was very inspired. She couldn't wait to learn how to control mana, because not every person is capable of this. But then Yuna remembered that they were already late getting home, and pulled her little brother forward. They needed to get back before their mother started to worry. Yunha thought that he was ready to give his life for this smile. His family was killed when he was 6 years old, so he needed to hurry with the preparations. In order to change the future, he was ready to do anything, but now he just needed to go home, and that was happiness. Nevertheless, thoughts about the tragedy continued to disturb our hero, but now a plan was maturing in his brain on how to prevent it. Yunha started training by bringing a top and asking his little sister to spin it without using her hands, just with her willpower and mana. Yuna had plenty of mana, but directing it in the right direction was not so easy. The top moved chaotically, without spinning. The girl complained that it was very difficult to control the flow of energy, but her brother assured her that after a few training sessions, everything would work out. Yunha thought with regret that his sister had the gift of storing large amounts of mana since birth, but she had absolutely no ability to control it. But he did not say this out loud. Yuna seemed to read his thoughts. She decisively exclaimed that now she would succeed. She would spin the top correctly on the first try. The girl put all her energy into spinning the top, her hands releasing a stream of mana so strong that it would be enough to demolish a wall. Luckily, there was no wall in front of her, but the top spun so fast that it bounced off the floor, hit the corner of the sofa, and flew over Yuna's shoulder. Then she hit the wall, bounced back, then forward again, to one side, and then the other. Our hero realized that his sister still had a lot to learn, but the first steps had been taken. After a while, the family gathered in front of the TV. Some beauty received a prestigious Academy Award and showered her with gratitude. The house was warm and cozy. Despite the fact that it was winter outside, the feeling of warmth and comfort did not leave our hero. In a few minutes, the new year was supposed to come. Mom reminded Yunhee that next year he would be 6 years old, which meant that, as promised, he had to go to kindergarten. The boy frowned and muttered that he absolutely didn't need a garden, his mother agreed, but added that she could use some more free time, and besides, she had to keep her word. Our hero thought that this would be fair, since he had already avoided the garden for quite a long time, terrorizing his parents with constant whining. He really didn't want to spend time around noisy children who cried for any reason. Just thinking about it gave Yunhee a headache. The hosts of the program reported that there was 1 minute left before the new year. This moment will change the future of all humanity, as a very important event must occur. The announcer asked for attention on the screen. Their correspondent was supposed to go live from the scene of the events. A girl appeared with headphones and a microphone, who said that she was at the Yongmyo Temple, where their ancestors, members of the Joseon dynasty, were buried, and where a new page in Korean history would begin. Our hero grabbed his head. He already knew what kind of new chapter this would be, but he still wanted to refresh his memories and hoped that this time everything would be different. After humanity discovered mana and learned how to use it, everyone seemed to go crazy about it and use skills uncontrollably. But they didn't take into account that this would lead to the appearance of monsters, and on the very day that the 21st century began, an incident called the End of the Century occurred. The monsters destroyed approximately 30% of the planet's population, and the remaining survivors literally trembled with fear. Monsters appeared literally out of nowhere, and it took a long time before the cause was found. The government and laws were no longer in force. The only force that now had weight was mana, which caused a new hierarchy to emerge on Earth, with the rich and the hunters who controlled mana coming to power. Before the situation could be stabilized, the cities lost contact with each other, and humanity was on the brink of survival, in constant horror and chaos. But in Korea, full of despair, a small light of salvation lit up, giving hope to millions of people. It was at the Chonmyo temple that the beautiful Lim Ga-il appeared, and in the moonlight she came out to people for the first time. Both her face and her clothes were so beautiful that millions of viewers could not take their eyes off their television screens. Yuna also gasped in admiration and even clasped her hands, whispering that she had never seen anyone more beautiful in the world. Lim Ga-il used to be a popular actress, but now she became the first protector goddess of Korea, who needed to give people hope for the future. The woman had the gift of white grace, or more precisely, the ability to stop the action of mana and disperse it. All the players who defended the temple altar became the sword protectors of Korea and were called the 12 Thrones. All the players were controlled by mana control forces, but the strongest of them created their own clans, a thought that haunted Yunhei. As a person with the rarest gift that could stop monsters, Lim Ga-il was chosen to become one of the 12 thrones that protected Korea. She was already a very influential person before, but after becoming the throne, this woman's power increased indescribably. After all, players in this position received help from the clan and help from the Mana Control Committee. This made it possible to monitor the activities of all other players and subordinate them to one's will. One could not even dream of greater power. Lim Ga-il raised both her hands and addressed the 12 thrones with a speech, the gist of which was that their activities should bear good fruit. The woman approached the glowing magic ball and laid her hands on it. The ritual began with the words of prayer. The goddess turned to all the other gods of the earth and heaven with a request to grant her the strength to protect her country at all costs. The glow from the ball became larger and larger, and mana shot out from Lim Ga-il's hands towards the sky in a column of blue radiance. Within minutes, the dome of blue energy began to cover houses, trees, and fields, as if it was trying to cover the entire territory of Korea. The glow was so bright that there was no longer any need to look at the TV screen. The blue light penetrated into the houses of the cities straight from the street, from the sky. The correspondent happily informed the viewers that right now they were watching a protective hemisphere open up, a barrier that would help control the mana and prevent it from raging. Hearing that the barrier could be seen throughout the country, Yuna ran to the balcony to see the miracle with her own eyes. The girl's eyes were shining. She believed that the dome would protect them all. Yunha, who had joined his sister, did not share her delight, but remained silent. The sight was truly stunning. The girl even opened her mouth from the excess of emotion. She had never seen such beauty before. Everything around was filled with diffused blue light. People went outside to look at the dome and feel the sense of security they had long dreamed of. The parents joined Yuna and Yunha, smiling as they listened to the girl's excited cries about how the sky was now incredibly beautiful. The father folded his hands in a prayer of gratitude and said that now they could finally live in peace and quiet. The mother also thanked the goddess and began to pray. Her face glowed with joy and happiness. One could look at it endlessly. All the people around did the same. On the balcony opposite, another family froze in a happy prayer of gratitude, and another one a little lower. The people thanked Lim Ga-il with all their hearts. They believed that now the monsters would leave their country alone and everyone would be safe. Yuna and Yunhee's parents continued to pray, now silently, but it was not difficult to guess what words they were saying in their thoughts. The girl decided that she wanted to pray too. She folded her hands and invited her brother to join them. The boy looked at her with distrust. He was not naive, and besides, he knew what awaited their family and the whole country in the future. Yunha sadly bowed his head and thought that he really had no one to pray to. There would soon be no gods in this world. When the end came, all the gods died too, as did hundreds of millions of the planet's population, as did those who now came out onto the balconies with hope and gratitude. He looked at the windows of the surrounding houses and saw only shadows, only dark silhouettes of the people who lived in them, but it was a memory. Now the windows were shining with a bright and warm light, and people were really alive and celebrating the arrival of the new year, praying and thanking Limga-il for the protective dome. The skies are turning black again, our hero thought, pushing away the vision that had washed over him a minute earlier. Now was not the right moment for this. He heard his sister asking the gods to grant their family a happy and prosperous life, to protect them from all evil. Yunha looked at the girl who seemed like a real angel to him. Hope was awakening in his heart. He wanted everything to turn out exactly as Yuna asked. The boy firmly decided that in this life he would truly be happy with his family, because that was why he was given a second chance. He joined his family in prayer. But in reality, Yunhei was turning 6, which meant that the incident that took the lives of his family was getting closer. The Master of Darkness was not sleeping. The kraken that killed Yunhei's mom and dad didn't sleep either. Our hero tried not to think about it, but subconsciously felt what was in store for them all. Well, while the boy was waiting for a new stage in his childhood life, the announced kindergarten, by the way, looked quite attractive and was called Doan Evergreen Pines. Teacher Tayo greeted Yunhu and informed the children that a new friend would be joining them from now on. He asked the boy if he would like to introduce himself and tell the other children a little about himself, so that they could make friends. Our hero was a man of few words. He gave his name and age, after which he again fell silent with a sullen look. After thinking, he looked at the children sitting on the rug and added that he was very glad to meet everyone. This was not true, but it was polite. Teacher Tayo praised the boy, but noted that the welcoming speech was short. Maybe he should tell something more about himself to make friends. Yunha thought that he was not interested in children friends. But then he noticed a familiar hairstyle among those present, and then a face, and the next moment, indignant exclamations flew towards Yunhee. It was Kim Minji who asked in a displeased tone what he had forgotten in their group, why he had come here, and so on. Our hero was unpleasantly surprised and asked why Drin Minzi was bothering him again, since he was simply busy with his own affairs. The girl was really angry. She didn't want the other children to find out about the unpleasant nickname that Yunha had given her. Teacher Tayo asked the children to calm down. They had enough free time before lunch to make friends, but certainly not to get into conflict. His suggestion to be more friendly towards the new boy caused a whole wave of shouts and questions. Everyone wanted to know where the boy lived, what his favorite color was, and so on. After listening to the children and assessing the situation, Tayo decided that everything was going as it should be. He promised Yunhei that he would soon have many friends. As soon as the opportunity arose to escape from the children and their questions, our hero took advantage of it. He left the playroom and thought that he couldn't stand children. Here he saw a sign indicating a children's book corner, something like a small reading room. This was more interesting. The books were mostly children's, but killing time reading in silence was much more pleasant than fighting off persistent questions. Our hero chose a comfortable stool and began to look for a well-lit place to sit down with a book. He sat down at the table, but his attention was constantly drawn to the pink bow in the hair of the girl who was reading on the other side of the table, which prevented him from concentrating. Slowly turning page after page, Yunha felt that the girl was looking at him carefully, but with his peripheral vision, he saw that she wasn't even looking at the book. Yunha also stopped reading and stared blankly into the space in front of him. He didn't know how to ask the girl not to look so as not to offend her. The baby was quite beautiful. She had huge eyes and dark hair, but the pink bow was incredibly annoying. Apparently, it wasn't just Yunhu. Some boy approached the girl from behind and called out to her in a loud voice. It was Cho Yonghuk and his friends Ma Banjin and Yong Sinjin, who cheekily asked what the point of sitting around reading was. Yonghuk asked the girl, whose name was Yang Hye Yang, why she was always with a book, and whether she didn't have a single friend. The little girl turned to him and simply asked him to leave her alone, but this only made the boy even more angry. The guy screamed that he was terribly irritated by her vulgar pink ribbon and literally tore the bow out of her hair. The girl tried to take the ribbon back, almost crying. Yan Haiyan explained that her dad gave it to her, to which the boy replied that he would not give the bow back simply because he did not want it. Yeonhuk began throwing the ribbon to his comrades, inviting the girl to take her bow from her opponents, like a basketball. Yan Haiyan did not do this. She folded her hands, and with tears in her voice asked for the commemorative ribbon to be returned to her. The bully didn't listen. He continued to tease the girl and stick his tongue out at her. It was very childish and not at all gentlemanly. Yunha continued reading, not paying attention to what was happening. But then he again felt the girl's pleading gaze on his back, and without turning his head, ordered her to give him the bow. Yeonhuk looked angrily at the hero. The provocation had succeeded. He was lucky enough to run into resistance, which was what the boy was trying to achieve by starting a fight. Yunha slowly rose from his stool and considered whether it was acceptable to swing his fists on his first day of kindergarten. He approached the offender and said that he was behaving like a baby and that the game the boys were playing was not fun at all. Yeonhuk called Yunhu a moron and swung his arm to hit him. Apparently, the bully solved all his problems with force and was used to bullying children. He couldn't know that the boy in front of him had 32 years of life experience behind him. Yunha skillfully dodged the blow. The next moment, the offender was already flying back, turning upside down in the air. Everything happened very quickly. Our hero caught the pink bow on the fly and quickly walked forward as if nothing had happened at all. Yeonhuk hadn't even had time to land on the ground yet, and his opponent was already handing over a commemorative ribbon to Yang Hyeyang. The girl was confused and surprised. Looking at her grateful eyes, Yunha asked Hyeyang not to let anyone take her things away from her anymore. Surrounded by his friends, Yeonhuk promised that he would not leave this incident unpunished, to which our hero thought that it was not so scary to hear threats from a 6-year-old. Here he felt some movement of the aura and looked back at the enemy. It felt like there really was danger in the air. The bully promised that next time Yunhye would really get into trouble if he got in his way. Our hero did not pay attention to him, but at that moment he felt that someone was pulling him by the sleeve of his sweater. It was Yang Hyun, thus calling Yunhu to thank him for helping her return the memorable pink bow. The girl clutched the ribbon to her chest and was clearly embarrassed. But she still managed to overcome her indecision, looked up at Yunhu and said with a smile, "Thank you for what he did." Just at that moment, Yunha was thinking that among all the children in the garden, Minji and Yeonhuk had a lot of mana, while the rest didn't stand out. But then he looked at Yan Haiyan with a special vision and was simply stunned by what he saw. The hero did not expect such a turn of events. The girl had so much mana that even Yuna was left behind. Our hero had never seen such an amount of energy. He was so surprised that he even stepped back a little. Yan Haiyan had the power to destroy half a city, but she didn't even know about her own strength. Yunha noticed that the girl skillfully controlled her mana. Such a child had every chance of becoming one of the 12 thrones, or their protege at the very least. He leaned over to get a better look at her face. Before the regression, the hero had never heard the name Yan Haiyan, and it was strange. Even without becoming a player, she should have become famous already because of the amount of mana. Yunha extended his hand for a handshake and invited the little girl to become friends, adding that he didn't know why, but he really wanted to. Haiyan blushed, embarrassed again, but extended her hand in response and nodded hesitantly. She really didn't have any friends. The girl did not suspect that this time they paid attention to her rather out of mercantile interests, because our hero knew that mana was the greatest force in their world. Haiyan thanked him for the offer and shook his outstretched hand. Now Yunhee had the opportunity to stay closer to her. Yanhayan laughed and said that they would not just be friends, but good friends. She was absolutely sure of it. A little more time passed and the holiday of gratitude to parents arrived. Everything went on as usual in Yunhee's house. Mom pinned on the red carnations that were given to her, a symbol of celebration. She was very pleased and thanked her son for such a wonderful gift. Our hero was a little surprised. He made this carnation in kindergarten, but did not take it out of his backpack. His mother found it herself and pinned it to his sweater. The sister also received a portion of praise. The mother said that the flower the girl made looked even better than the real one and stroked her head. Yunha looked at his sister's carnation and thought that she hadn't really done it very well, but there was no need to be surprised. Yuna was, unlike him, a real child. Then Mom remembered that Yunhee had another craft in her backpack. She asked who this carnation was for. Maybe for Yuna. The girl was happy. The woman added that it was very gallant of him and asked who the third flower was for then. The boy didn't know what to answer. The question had driven him into a corner because in fact he had made the third carnation more out of habit. In the end, Yunha replied that he had prepared gifts for his mother, for Yuna, and for his grandmother, which surprised everyone very much. The fact is that having become an orphan, before the regression, our hero every year on this day made a carnation for his grandmother, who was raising him at the time. But he never gave his gift, he just left it in his backpack. The woman always found it herself and decorated their modest room. On none of the holidays did the boy give carnations directly. He suffered greatly from the fact that on Parents' Day, his only relative was his grandmother. To mark the holiday, the government decided to open the closed roads so that families could see their relatives who live far away. This was announced on television. A large number of player hunters were hired to protect the population that decided to travel in the event of monsters appearing. Our hero already knew that on that day, the 4th of May, many people died, including his family, who were destroyed by a giant kraken on the way to the city where his grandmother lived. Just when Yunha was thinking about this, his father came to him and said that the holidays were starting, the roads were open, which meant they could go on a trip. Yuna said that she wanted to go to her grandmother. Her parents happily supported this idea. Besides, they really hadn't seen each other for a long time. Yunha became determined to change the future and therefore realized that he had to cancel this trip at any cost. But it had to be done correctly. There was only one grandmother, and the father was an orphan, which meant that it would not be possible to suggest going to other relatives. The boy loved his maternal grandmother very much, so he didn't want to upset her or upset his relatives by refusing. His grandmother raised him after the death of his parents, doing everything possible to ensure that Yunha grew up to be a worthy person, always supporting him, even in the face of failure. As a result, he became a player. But then she died. The father interrupted the hero's thoughts, reminding him that the roads were open, but they would most likely be closed again after the holiday, and that he needed to decide quickly. Yunha plucked up his courage and suggested to his parents that they go to visit his grandmother another time. He heard what his father said, but decided to take a risk. The parents looked at their son with bewilderment. Firstly, he rarely contradicted them, and secondly, he loved his grandmother very much, so much so that he even made a carnation for her. The mother leaned over to the boy and reminded him about the carnation. She asked if her son wanted to see his grandmother and why she was suggesting going another time. Yunha replied that he wanted to, but not on that day. He again asked to postpone the trip, which caused concern to his mother. Our hero realized that he is just a child. His word means nothing, therefore, in order to achieve success, he needs to behave accordingly, like a child. The boy exclaimed that soon it would be Children's Day, that there was an amusement park near their house, which they had never been to, and that there were rides there that he dreamed of riding. Hearing what her brother was talking about, Yuna also shouted that she really wanted to go to the amusement park. She had completely forgotten about it and had long dreamed of going on a ride. The parents didn't mind. They thought that the children really deserved a trip to the amusement park. It was very close. But because of the monsters, Neither Yuna nor Yunha had ever been there. The father smiled and said that they would definitely correct this unfortunate misunderstanding and go ride the rides tomorrow. Mom, smiling, added that this was a good reason to cook something tasty and asked what kind of treat the children would like. Yuna screamed that she wanted nuggets and sandwiches. Yuna almost jumped with joy. It seems his plan worked. Our hero was inspired. If you can't stand in the way of the Kraken, you can stand in the way of your parents, and then everything will be fine. Then the phone rang. It was quite unexpected because the work calls had already ended. Yunha felt that something was wrong. It was as if the universe did not give him a chance to interfere with the events of the future. His mother was talking on the phone, and her voice was becoming more and more anxious. At this point, sweat began to run down the woman's forehead. She asked several times how her mother was feeling now, her voice trembling. At the end of the conversation, my mother asked me to take care of my grandmother and call her whenever necessary. They would pay for everything. After hanging up the phone, the woman's face darkened. She was very worried. Her husband and daughter rushed to ask what had happened and if the grandmother was okay. Mom explained that no one knows the details yet, and there is no diagnosis either, but Grandma fainted and is currently undergoing examination. Yunha was scared. Nothing like this had happened before his regression. His grandmother had absolutely no health problems until he entered the Players' Academy. Mom tried to calm herself and her family down by saying that it was probably nothing serious, but she wanted to see her grandmother to make sure. Dad supported this idea, saying that he was also worried, so he would go with her. But what about the children, he added. Father told Yuna and Yunha that they couldn't go to the park because they would be going to Grandma's tomorrow, once the road security was ready. Mom looked at Yunhu. He was very scared and tense. The woman thought it was because of the amusement park, so she decided to talk to him separately. She leaned over and began to console the boy, saying that everyone would definitely go to the amusement park, just another day, and that right now their care was really needed by their grandmother. Our hero thought that he only tried to change the future, and immediately the grandmother suffered. Who knows what might happen if he does not stop these attempts? If he couldn't stop his family from facing the Kraken, then why would he even have a second chance? Yunha was desperate. But still, the new life was somewhat different from the previous one, because something had changed significantly. He himself had changed. Since childhood, he has been accumulating mana and has already collected a decent amount. In addition, he has combat experience from his past life, and in it, he was one of the strongest players. The boy told his mother that it was okay. He agreed. But he himself thought that if he couldn't prevent his family from meeting the Kraken, then he could do something else. Yunha stood facing the wall and thought about his battle plan. Mom and Yuna decided that he was upset and began to console him. But our hero imagined what the monster he had to defeat looked like. Every detail, right down to every sucker on the tentacles, surfaced in his memory. He was gathering his resolve to destroy the enemy, even if he was in the body of a 6-year-old boy. Yunha thought that he would fight the monster with all the means available to him. He would make every effort to prevent his parents and sister from dying. The Mana Control Bureau has classified all monsters based on the level of threat they pose. Monsters of the 9th, 8th, and 7th levels were minor nuisances, such as environmental pollution and the like, while monsters of the 6th level posed a danger to entire areas of cities. Level 5 and 4 creatures committed mass murder and could threaten an entire city and were considered equivalent to medium-strength earthquakes. 3rd-level monsters brought hordes of weaker monsters with them and threatened the well-being of an entire country. They were associated with natural disasters. The Kraken was one of these, committing mass murder and even affecting the Korean government, as it could not be neutralized. The second-tier monsters were a disaster for the continent, while the first-tier monsters threatened the existence of all of humanity, such as the Master of Darkness that Yunha fought in the abyss, almost dying. Yunha rummaged through his desk drawer, trying to find a weapon suitable for defeating the Kraken, something he had done quite easily when he was an adult. The thing is that mostly C-rank players were hired to guard the roads, and their skills were not enough to defeat such a monster. Our hero sighed, thinking that in a child's body it would be unlikely that he would be able to significantly influence the situation. It was necessary to buy time until the 12 thrones arrived to help, because with fire magic they could deal with the Kraken quite easily. At least last time, it took literally 15 minutes and one of the warriors to stabilize the situation. He took quite a bit of damage, the monster's tentacles repeatedly knocking the player back, but he had good stamina and fighting skills. Of the suitable items, our hero found only scissors and a stationary paper knife. If he enveloped them in mana, he could count on several fairly successful attacks. It would be nice to take a kitchen knife, but Mom would notice if it was missing, so I'll have to use what I found. Mom just looked into her son's room, asking if he was getting ready for the trip. They were about to leave. Everyone was ready, so the woman hurried Yunhu. They needed to get there before the traffic jam started. There were quite a few people who wanted to travel to their relatives. The boy smiled and asked for another 5 minutes. He still had to find and put literally a couple more things in his backpack. Finally, Yunha zipped up his backpack and announced that he was ready. He was ready not only for the trip, but also for the fact that he would have to fight off the monster. The sun was on the horizon, and the streets and bridges of the city were filled with endless streams of cars. Everyone was rushing to take advantage of the open roads. Our hero's family was unable to avoid traffic jams. Their red car stopped in another traffic jam. Yuna was already tired, and they hadn't even left the city yet. Mom turned to the children and suggested that they sleep. Apparently, the road promised to be very long. The boy replied that he was fine and smiled. Yuna fell asleep, leaning on his shoulder, and it was nice to feel the warmth and breath of her little sister. The car gradually moved forward. Now they were driving along the Sansan Bridge, and our hero began to become noticeably nervous. The thing is that last time the Kraken appeared as soon as their car drove onto the bridge. This time they drove halfway, but the monster was still not there. This meant only one thing. Something else had changed in the future, something that Yunha didn't even know about yet, and it visibly scared him. He asked the gods for only one thing, that they would just let the car pass the bridge in peace. But the future could not be changed. An explosion was heard ahead. Mom watched in horror as pieces of asphalt and cars flew in different directions. There was no way to turn the car around and go back because of the traffic. The father froze. He understood that they had absolutely no chance of saving the children while in the car, but at the same time, getting out of the car meant being left completely without shelter. Machine parts and rocks continued to fly at them. The Kraken's tentacles were destroying the bridge and everything on it, and new fires were breaking out. Yuna started to wake up. Yunha continued to hold her hand, trying not to let her get too scared. It seemed to him that the monster was simply mocking his desperate desire to change the future, which is why it was in no hurry to show itself. And then he saw it. It was that same Kraken, a monster equated to a natural disaster within the city. With its tentacles, it scattered cars with passengers like children's toys, demolished houses and bridge supports with one blow, and it was no longer possible to stay in place. His parents realized it too. The father attempted to back up, still hesitating to get out of the car, but the road was blocked by an accident. Someone had already tried to do this before and failed. People ran out onto the bridge and tried to escape by moving in the opposite direction. Everyone was wondering where the players hired for security were. Finally, the player hunters appeared and headed straight for the Kraken's tentacles. The situation could become more favorable. The guards were well armed and prepared to save as many people as possible, but someone had to disarm the Kraken. But then one of them noticed an additional threat that he had not expected at all. The man froze, unable to move. The Kraken's tentacle was rapidly descending straight towards him, and now there was no longer a player, nor a couple of cars near which he was. It was only a miracle that Yunhee's parents' car was not hit. The other guards, and we remember that their rank was quite low, looked with horror at what was left of their colleague. Everyone reacted differently. Some of the players tried to inflict at least some damage on the monster, while others simply ran away. People got out from under the rubble on their own. Yunhee and Yun's parents continued to sit in a daze, not daring to get out of the car, but sooner or later it still had to be done. Finally, the father voiced what everyone was afraid of. We needed to get out, but with extreme caution, because there was complete chaos outside. In a trembling voice, the man tried to convince the family that if they moved slowly, everything would end well. Yunha looked at his dad as if for the last time. He knew something that was still unknown to his father. Mom turned to the children and said that she loved them, and they needed to do as Dad said. That way they would be saved, the players would protect them. They opened the door and took their first steps across the bridge. Yuna was the last to get out of the car. She was the most scared of all. When getting out of the car, the little girl tripped and twisted her ankle. Yunha did not have time to give her a hand in time, and something irreparable happened. Now the girl was sitting on the ground and trying to stand up on her foot in fear, but she was unable to do so, and she declared that she could not walk on her own. Yuna began to cry, realizing that she needed to get up and save herself, but she couldn't do it. She was afraid of dying herself, but even more afraid of putting her loved ones at risk. Then the father said that there was no point in shedding tears. He could easily carry his daughter in his arms. That way they would walk slower, but would still be able to move forward. He approached the baby and began to carefully lift her up. Mom and Yunha did not interfere so as not to create unnecessary trouble. The boy was scared, but not for himself, but for his family. His father asked if he could go and received an affirmative answer. Then one of the players ran up to them and ordered them to follow him in order to get to the evacuation point in the safest way. Yunha thought that while the regular players were in a panic, the veterans quickly adapted to the situation and began evacuating people. The boy remembered how it was last time. The Kraken was not the only problem. He needed to cross the bridge before other monsters attacked. But they didn't have time. The next moment, the player who had agreed to accompany them was pierced through and through with a spear. He fell down dead, and Yunhee's father stopped. He didn't know what to do now, continue to make his way to the shelter, or return to the car. The man watched in horror as whole hordes of new, terrifying monsters rose from the water across the bridge. Here, one of them grabbed the railing with his clawed paws and was ready to appear right in front of our heroes. Yunha realized that what he feared most had happened. The creatures had appeared before his family had managed to get off the bridge. They were Class 7 monsters, divers, but there were so many of them that the number of human casualties increased with every minute. Half-fish with terrible predatory teeth used spears as weapons, although they were quite capable of simply biting off anyone's head. The female player, who specialized in healing, narrowly escaped the attack, but who knows how long she can hold out. The veterans quickly got their bearings and began to repel the attack, covering the advance of the civilians. One of the players was holding a wounded girl in his arms and asked if there were any healers nearby. The woman we had already noticed volunteered to help and ran forward, only a few meters away from the injured girl. But the huntress couldn't overcome them either. The spear of another diver struck the target with lightning speed, and it fell dead. There were so many monsters that the people who found themselves surrounded had practically no chance of survival. The Yunhee family stood in the middle of this chaos in complete confusion. Right around them, the divers were going wild. A little further away, the Kraken was tearing apart the remains of the bridge with its tentacles. Here, the father asked the children to obey and do what he tells them without hesitation, and he in turn promises to protect them. He ordered his wife and son not to look back and just run forward, and advised his daughter to close her eyes. There was no time to think. They all ran. It was the only chance to survive, but no one could give any guarantees that the attempt would be successful. Just at that moment, a Kraken tentacle flew over them and simply grabbed several cars and their passengers in an armful. The second tentacle repeated the same thing and lifted the cars up, only to then simply throw them off the bridge. The third tentacle destroyed both the bridge and the cars with direct blows, completely unconcerned about how effective such tactics were. Yunha looked at what was happening and realized that his father had not made the best decision. Running forward was too dangerous. The boy tried to call out to his dad, who was moving ahead, clearing the way as best he could, and tell him about it. But the father already understood that he had to stop. With another blow of the tentacle, the Kraken threw the fuel tanker and provoked a powerful explosion. A new fire started. There was practically nothing left of the bridge ahead, and Yunhee's family simply stood there and looked at the wall of flames ahead. It was unclear what to do next, where to go, especially since our heroes simply froze, desperately trying to come up with at least something. The players also didn't know what to do. The road was destroyed. Reinforcements weren't arriving. People only had a couple of minutes to get their bearings. One of them shouted that they had to hold out until reinforcements arrived. The thrones had to arrive and destroy the monsters. Yuna remembered that in his past life, the thrones arrived 30 minutes after the Kraken appeared. Since the escape routes were blocked, all hope lay with the players who were on the bridge now. They could defeat the divers, but if no one destroyed the Kraken soon, everyone would die. Yuna thought that he had been preparing for this from the very beginning. He had to save his family even at the cost of his own life. It was time to act. The boy took a stationary knife and scissors out of his backpack, and his mother became worried, not understanding what he was planning. Our hero asked his parents to stay close to the players and not leave them until help arrived. The father almost shouted to ask what was going on. He was no less worried about his son than the mother, and also did not understand what his restless child was going to do. Yuna said that for now the players are protecting them, but if something else happens, Yuna can help the parents. He explained everything to her earlier. There was so much confidence in the child's voice that his parents did not stop him. Perhaps this was a result of severe stress. Yunha looked at his sister and said that she was the only one present who could use and control mana, so she should only do it when absolutely necessary. The girl was too scared, and also very worried about her brother and did not want to let him go, but she still agreed. The boy did not hesitate, turned around and ran towards the Kraken. His mother only managed to stretch out her hand after him, but could not hold him back. Yunha was determined to kill the monster, save his family, and live a new life, given to him for the second time. He ran between the cars towards the monster with a stationary knife at the ready, but he felt that his speed was not enough. Then our hero decided to use the skill he used as a player. It was not easy in the body of a child, but he managed to use the force and accelerate. It was a heavenly stepping technique, and it was quite difficult for a man in a boy's body, and his strength did not last long. But this way he could instantly reach the Kraken, so Yunha decided not to spare himself and move on. He used his heavenly steps again and leapt from one car to another with huge leaps, as fast as an arrow. People who noticed him were very surprised. Not a single child had ever used the techniques of the players in Korea. The hunters, who noticed the boy, ordered him to stop immediately. It was too dangerous, but our hero did not listen and rushed forward. Even the divers froze in surprise. They hadn't expected anything like this, and Yunhee's speed was so high that they barely had time to notice him. The boy raced across the roofs of cars straight towards the monsters with a stationary knife at the ready. He was ready to attack. Approaching the opponents, Yunha managed to envelop his childish weapon in mana beforehand, and it was no longer so harmless. He took out the first diver with one blow, but the rest of the monsters rushed to help, to take revenge on the reckless child. The knife in our hero's hand worked perfectly, despite his short, childish arms and weak muscles, and his combat skills from his past life were beginning to be restored. One blow was followed by another, and soon the number of defeated divers exceeded 10. The boy moved along the roofs of cars, leaving behind the corpses of monsters. When his path was blocked, a couple of movements of the knife solved the problem, but the battle undoubtedly took a lot of strength from the child. Yunha then decided not to kill the divers, but simply move forward, jumping over them when it was possible to avoid a fight. If this was impossible, the boy would use a knife. Now he had more strength to strike, and the monsters' heads would fly off with one movement of the knife. To move faster, our hero began to dodge attacks, avoiding opponents. He jumped over monsters from above and rolled under them from below. In the same way, Yuna covered the distance between the cars, sometimes jumping, sometimes rolling. His goal was to get to the Kraken as quickly as possible. The knife worked perfectly. The mana reserve was still quite large, and repelling the attacks of monsters was becoming easier and easier. The skills from the past life worked better each time. There was only a little bit left to the tentacles. The road was blocked only by a couple of divers, and Yunha realized that he had almost reached his goal. He swung his knife at another monster and practically cut it in half, just like the adult Yunha destroyed monsters. It was nice to realize that even in a child's body he managed to fully restore his fighting skills. The boy was rapidly moving forward. Our hero remembered that he had previously possessed a special technique that allowed him to speed up and strengthen his blow. He needed to try to use it now, before meeting the Kraken. Yunha tried to concentrate as much as possible and think through a further strategy in order to get rid of all the divers on the way at once. He gathered all his mana into his fingertips and his knife, spun around, and began to act like a whirlwind of blue light. Landing on the ground after a series of blows, the boy assessed the situation and was quite pleased with the result. The diver tried to attack him, hiding below under the debris, but Yunha noticed it in time and jumped high into the air, only to then quickly descend and destroy the enemy before he even realizes what happened. Another monster launched a spear at the boy, but our hero jumped again, avoiding the hit. Having finished with the last diver, Yunha whispered that it took very little time. He became himself again, became immortal again. The guy added that it was time to end all this. The Kraken was very close. All that was left was to overcome the last few dozen meters. Scissors were added to the knife. Our hero began to jump from one roof of the car to another, simultaneously enveloping the additional weapon in mana. Yunha used magical protection on his entire body because he didn't know how strong the enemy was and what to expect from him. The heavenly steps were working even better now. The distance was closing very quickly. Now it was time to use the weapon. The boy stopped in front of the Kraken, and only now did it become clear how tiny Yunha was compared to the monster. The hero thought that he would have to fight with the weapon he had, although it was unlikely to cause significant damage to the monster. There was no choice. At this time, the Kraken raised a tentacle, preparing to crush the person who dared to come close to it. The monster missed by a little, smashing several cars standing between him and Yunha into pieces. The boy could only hope that there were no people inside. There was not a second to lose, and our hero jumped and landed right on the tentacle, digging into the tentacle with a knife and scissors to secure himself. The monster swung its limb and the boy almost fell down, hanging on his simple weapon, stuck in the monster. The main task was to reach the head, so Yunha used heavenly steps again, getting closer to the most vulnerable areas. Having reached his goal, he began to strike blow after blow, hoping that in this way he would be able to cut the thick skin and inflict a more serious wound, delaying time until the arrival of the thrones. A large cut had to be made, and the boy figured out how to achieve this. He climbed onto the top of the head and stuck scissors and a knife deep into the skin. Yunha hung on the weapon and with the weight of his body cut the Kraken's skin in 2 places at once, descending several meters down. It was quite an effective solution. Our hero was glad that he managed to carry out his plan. He wanted to rip the monster open to the very bottom, but he saw in time that a Kraken tentacle was flying straight at him. The boy jumped back to avoid the blow, but that didn't mean the next attack would take a long time to come. Having landed on the ground, Yunha had already begun to think about the tactics of his actions. It was pleasant for him to feel strong and powerful again. True, one of the blades of the scissors remained in the monster's body, but this in no way shook our hero's confidence. Since the weapon resembled a dagger, Yunha again enveloped it in mana and was satisfied with the result. It was possible to attack again. At this time, blows rained down on the hero. but he managed to react quite quickly and did not receive serious damage. Bouncing off another tentacle that fell right on the spot where the boy had just been standing, he began to climb up the Kraken's body again. But another tentacle prevented the hero from carrying out his plan, throwing the boy down like a bug. Yunha was not used to giving up. He climbed onto the Kraken's head again and began to inflict wounds on the monster, putting all his strength and mana into them. In fact, blows of such force did not pass without a trace for the boy. He completely exhausted his body, but in the heat of battle he did not notice this, driven by excitement. Our hero felt like everything was swimming before his eyes, but he didn't pay attention to it. There was no time to feel sorry for himself. The Kraken knocked Yunhu down again with a tentacle strike. The monster clearly didn't like what was happening. He was starting to get angry. The next swing of the tentacle threw the boy so far away that it would have taken him several minutes to reach the Kraken. Our hero rose to his feet, grasping the improvised dagger made from scissors with both hands. He had no intention of stopping. But the monster decided to finally get rid of the annoying enemy, so it launched its next attack on the bridge supports right under the boy's feet. The impact was incredibly strong and smashed the support into pieces, with debris flying like hail in all directions. Yunhei managed to avoid being directly hit by the rocks, but he was now standing on a crumbling piece of the bridge, trying to maintain his balance so as not to fall into the water. Thinking that it was time to finish with this annoying freak, the hero gathered his resolve for a new attack. His mana was already critically low. The boy covered the distance to the whole part of the bridge, closer to the Kraken, in a few jumps, but its tentacles were already ready. They continued to destroy the architectural structure, literally following Yunha on his heels. The boy barely had time to jump away. Climbing over chunks of concrete, our hero sensed that the monster was up to something worse, but there was no time to look back. The Kraken grabbed the truck and prepared to throw it straight at his stubborn opponent. Apparently, that was his plan. The boy hadn't noticed this yet. He was standing and preparing to repel the attack of the monster's other tentacles, which were a little lower and closer. It was only when the truck began to creak from the pressure the monster was putting on it, preparing to pounce, that Yunha noticed the sound. Now the truck is already flying towards the place where the child had just been. Another second and all that will remain of it will be a wet spot. Our hero collected all the remaining mana on the weapon so that the attack power was maximum. It was not so easy. And yet, by nature, Yunha was a winner. He shouted that now the freak would get what he deserved for everything he had done. Raising his simple weapon above his head, he concentrated a colossal amount of energy on its blade. At the cost of incredible effort, the boy managed to cut the truck flying at him in half with a piece of scissors. Even the thrones were not capable of such a thing. The blow was so strong that Yunha himself almost fell off his feet. Until the very end, he did not believe that he could do something like that as a child. There were only a few meters left until the Kraken's eye, and our hero prepared to strike again. But then everything started swimming before his eyes again. The next moment, the boy realized that he was lying on his side. His eyes were open, but he couldn't even blink. The scissors lay in front of Yunha. A fire was blazing behind him, and he tried with his last effort to at least close his eyes. But he didn't have the strength for that either. His mana was completely exhausted. Thoughts were spinning in my head that I needed to try to move. It couldn't be that the mana would run out so suddenly. The hero thought that if he couldn't get up now and finish what he had started, then everything he had already done was completely in vain. In front of his unblinking eyes, there was only one target, the Kraken. It was so close that it seemed like it would be enough to just reach out and kill it, but Yunhee didn't have the strength to do that. All he managed to do was lift his body a little, using his fist as support, but that only lasted for a second. Our hero tried to get up again. He decided that it was not time to give up yet. It was very difficult, but the boy literally moved forward centimeter by centimeter. The boy, like a mantra, repeated to himself that he needed to go to the end and tried to crawl at least to the piece of scissors that fell nearby. He had a great incentive. Yunha wanted to live, and not just live his second life like the previous one, but spend it with his family. The Kraken's huge tentacle shot into the air. The monster had no intention of stopping halfway. It hovered right above Yunha, only to fall down a moment later and crush the child like an ant. The hero realized that he could die now. He did not have the strength to dodge the blow, but he did not want to die like this. He didn't want to die and prayed to the universe for a miracle to happen, and then he felt that a miracle was really happening. Yuna's arms wrapped around him, and the boy found himself in his sister's arms so quickly that he didn't think about how she had ended up there and that she was also in danger. He simply felt a huge sense of relief. The girl screamed for the Kraken not to dare touch her brother. Her desire to save Yunhu was so strong that a protective glow of mana began to shine around the children. The Kraken's tentacle completed its movement, striking right at the spot where the children were, the glow becoming brighter. Even the divers stopped their attacks and froze in amazement. They had never seen anything like it. Sparks and fragments of the Kraken's tentacle reached all the way to the monsters. Even those who called themselves thrones did not have such a powerful defensive force, at least among those living in those times. The Kraken's blow did not damage the bridge, although it should have broken a huge piece of it, crushing the boy and girl who were hit, but only half of the tentacle remained. Yunha realized that he had survived despite all the predictions. It really was a miracle created by Yuna. A miracle was a gift that allowed one to change the world and its physical laws. In a past life, our hero knew 4 people who were capable of this, including Li Yuan, his faithful partner. When Yuna first saw the mana reserves his sister had, he thought that it would be enough to perform a miracle, but until the last moment, he was not sure of his guesses. Now the miracle happened. The girl hugged her brother, calming him down and repeating that everything would be fine. She saved them both, but she didn't even understand it. The glow of mana did not weaken, and the boy realized that Yuna's magic continued to work. His wounds were healing literally before his eyes. But that was not all. The girl managed to close them with a protective dome, protecting them from new attacks of the Kraken, while all she was interested in was her brother's well-being. Yunha was also worried not for himself, but for his sister. He asked if everything was okay. The creation of a miracle does not pass without a trace. Usually the price for using the gift is very high. Yuna smiled and replied that she felt great. Complaining was completely out of character for her. She was a cheerful and optimistic child. But then the girl felt that not everything was as good as it had first seemed to her. She was very tired. The baby's eyes began to close and she almost fell asleep in her worried brother's arms. The glow began to fade. Looking at Yuna's calm face and the small glow in the area of her heart, our hero realized that she had just enough mana left to sustain life. That was very good. If the price for using the gift of miracle was just mana, then little sister would be fine. Yunha carefully placed the girl on the ground, not believing that everything had worked out so well. Now he would take care of their safety. The wounds healed, the strength was restored, and the boy left Yuna to rest, and he himself decided to finish what he started and fight the Kraken again. He was sure that this time he would manage on his own. There was not much time left before the thrones came, of course, if the future had not changed too much. Yunha surrounded himself with a protective force field and began to gather energy in order to deal significant damage to the monster. The boy was enveloped in a blue glow. He was thinking about how best to attack, while the Kraken lowered the tentacles damaged by Yuna into the water and slowly regenerated. His eyes were filled with malice. The monster did not understand how some bugs managed to repel his attack. Yunha noticed that the Kraken opened its eyes, exposing its most vulnerable spot to attack. Was the monster really so surprised by Yuna's gift? The hero smiled. But then the creature's tentacles shot up, preparing to smear the children. The boy whispered that no one would touch his sister, strengthened the protective field, and prepared mana in his hands to repel the attack. In his past life, our hero used the palms of his hands as weapons. and now, having fully recovered, he had the skills to repeat this technique in the body of a child. Yunha prepared both hands to deflect the Kraken's tentacles. He wanted to protect his little sister at any cost. The boy hit one tentacle, then another. Everything worked as he wanted. The monster's blows did not reach their target. Mana was fully restored. Yunha realized that he was strong enough to last until the coming of the thrones. The future had changed. His family had managed to survive, which meant that now there was no need to defeat the Kraken. It would be enough to simply prevent it from killing himself and Yuna. And with this task, in the state that his sister's magic gave him, Yunha would have easily coped, even without a weapon. About half an hour before this, a traffic jam had formed on the neighboring bridge due to an incident. The leader of one of the clans was riding in one of the cars. The man was angry. He didn't know about the incident yet, so he was simply angry because the flow of cars wasn't moving forward at all. He was yawning out of boredom. He muttered under his breath that long waits were incredibly tiring, and this city with its traffic jams was completely unbearable. The red-haired player accused the driver of choosing this path and accused him of only steering but not pressing the pedals at all. The man leaned back in his seat and said he regretted joining the throne instead of enjoying his vacation. Now he was stuck in traffic, called in to guard the city. He wanted to fight monsters, not mess around with civilians. Perhaps he should resign from the position. Hearing this, the driver laughed nervously. Here they both felt something strange. The driver was also a player, and a pretty good one at that, with an excellent sense of smell, not to mention one of the thrones. "There's a lot of mana here," the driver whispered in amazement. The red-haired man replied that he had noticed it himself. At that moment, his mobile phone rang with an incredibly annoying sound. At first, the hero wanted to smash it, but he held back. Looking at the screen, he realized that he had not held back in vain. It was a message about an attack by a third-level monster, an urgent call to the position. At first, the clan leader was suspicious of the information. He understood that it was almost impossible to get out of the traffic jam and go to the battle. According to the information received, it was necessary to fight with a Kraken, a third-level monster. It was quite interesting. The throne's eyes lit up with fire. Now all he cared about was where the monster was and how to get there as quickly as possible. The driver looked back at his boss and thought that there was a monster raging nearby, and he was happy about it. What would people think when they saw such a reaction? The voice on the phone said that the incident happened on Songsan Bridge, but there are currently quite a few players there busy with the evacuation. It is unknown whether they were able to cause any damage to the Kraken. Because they are mainly busy with divers, the throne is tasked with neutralizing the main monster. After the voice said that he would soon pick up the red-haired man nearby, he turned off the phone. The next moment, the throne opened the car door and got out of it. He intended to get his weapon out of the trunk as quickly as possible. The driver stopped the Lord of the Blade Clan with his shout. It was at least 2 hours' walk to the scene of the tragedy. The man stretched his legs and said that with such traffic jams, the only way to get to the Kraken was on foot. After that, he opened the trunk and took out his famous sword. With such a weapon, he had every chance of defeating the monster. The driver reminded him once again that he simply wouldn't make it on foot in time. It would be simply madness to leave the car in such a situation. The throne looked at him with excitement and said that 30 minutes would be enough for him to cover such a distance. After a few seconds, the throne enveloped itself in such a flow of power that it became completely obvious that his words were true. The man's eyes began to glow. His muscles became stronger. All that was left was to apply acceleration and go to the call. And so he did, rushing between the cars, stuck in traffic like a shining comet with a long tail of light behind him. The drivers of the cars only had time to notice a flash of blue light that flashed past them. The driver of the throne sat behind the wheel and thought that the boss was in his element. All that interested him was the opportunity to defeat the most powerful monster. That's what he was, the Lord of the Blade Clan, the Fire Demon, Kang Hyun Chul, fast as lightning and strong as a hurricane. Half an hour later, he had already scattered the divers around him, burning them with a deadly fire, approaching the site of the disaster. Hyunchul's speed was very high. The sword, shrouded in flames, cut off the heads of opponents left and right, but the man did not waste time on trifles, making his way to the Kraken. He was almost there when he noticed something very strange ahead, something that surprised him greatly. Right in the middle of the bridge, a powerful pillar of magic rose up. Nothing like this should have happened in this place. The throne continued to rush forward, thinking that there should be no one here and now who was capable of something like this. This meant that someone new had appeared in the city, someone equal in power to one of the thrones, but not yet one. Yes, it was Yuna and Yunha. The boy continued to reflect more and more blows of the Kraken with the help of his hands. He was already noticeably tired, but he didn't stop, expecting help to arrive any minute. He still had quite a lot of mana left. And help came, relying on his fiery sword. Kang Hyunchul was rapidly approaching the children. It only took a couple of blows to cut off all the Kraken's tentacles threatening Yuna and Yunha. The throne was indeed a very powerful warrior. Our hero breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, he could relax and rest a little after all. It was very difficult to fight in the body of a child. But then the boy recognized the one who had come to their aid. In his past life, he had been well acquainted with the fire demon. The Kraken received several blows to the head and eyes. The wound site began to burn with fire. The demon was practically defeated. But the key word here is practically. The monster jumped off the bridge into the water to put out the flames and get a chance to recover. The throne with the flaming sword stood and looked at the huge circles on the water. The children behind him also did not understand whether it was all over or there would be a continuation. The gift of pyrokinetics allowed the throne to freely control fire. In fact, this gift was the reason for the nickname of the fire demon, but the flame was powerless underwater. Until the Kraken rose to the surface, Hyunchul had nothing to do. He looked around. And of course, I noticed the children hugging each other on the remains of the bridge. They looked scared, but completely normal. Taking a closer look, the throne thought that they were just two children, not looking like new players or warriors. There was a huge amount of mana around the girl. Hyunchul was surprised to realize that the magic he noticed was apparently done by her. The man guessed that the little girl had spent all her mana and lost consciousness, and the boy, who was now hugging her, stood up to defend against the Kraken in her place. Kang Hyunchul smiled carnivorously. He wanted to see what kind of players these kids would grow into. He already considered them as future rivals. But it was impossible to show one's intentions ahead of time. The throne approached the children and waved his hand, promising that he would not cause harm. Squinting his eyes slyly, he thought that at least he wouldn't cause any harm now, and then we'll see. Yunha looked at the fire demon with distrust. He knew what kind of person he was. He knew that he shouldn't be trusted. But at that moment, Hyunchul was only interested in the monster. He focused all his attention on the Kraken. He needed to get rid of it. The head of the Blade clan warned the boy not to come closer and not to interfere. It would be dangerous now. The monster began to rise from under the water. The movement of the tentacles was clearly visible from the bridge, which meant that the monster was not going to run away from the threat and was determined to fight to the end. Our hero remembered what Kang Hyunchul was like in his past life. When he was already much older, having met the Deathless, the fire demon constantly tried to provoke him. He did this in order to measure his strength and enter into battle, but Yunha tried in every way to prevent this. They first met in the ruins, and the fire demon told our hero that his fame and reputation preceded his appearance. When asked what he wanted, Hyunchul replied that he just wanted to check if Immortal was as good as others said. The fire demon offered to fight, but Yunha replied that there was no point, and simply asked him to move out of the way so he could pass. Kang Hyunchul said that they would only be able to pass after they tested their strength. There was no other way. The Immortal exhaled loudly. He didn't want to waste time, but apparently he couldn't avoid the fight. He coated his sword in mana and promised his impudent opponent that he would greatly regret standing in his way. The fire demon was incredibly pleased, because he had finally achieved what he wanted. Full of inspiration, he raised his weapon engulfed in flames above his head. But Yunha struck first, received a portion of fire in response, then he delivered a couple more blows, and the fight ended. Now our hero was hugging his sister and looking at the back of the one who had bothered him in his past life, and would probably bother him now. Before his regression into a child, Kang Hyun-chul tried to challenge the immortal to a duel many times, but Yunha never defeated him. The peculiarity of the fire demon was that the stronger the enemy was, the stronger he became after defeating him, and this continued over and over again. He was simply born for battle. Now Hyun-chul peered into the depths and lamented that the kraken had taken a suspiciously long time to appear. Was it really afraid of the little fire? He did not suspect that the monster had its own insidious plan, and it consisted of destroying the bridge supports. Feeling that the columns had stopped holding the road, the throne realized what had happened, but until the bridge collapsed, he continued to stand on his feet. The man shouted at the children not to move, as the creature had destroyed the column and they could all fall down at any moment. Yunha picked up his little sister in his arms, so that if anything happened, he could jump away with her to a safe place, and the Blade Lord thought that the presence of children was preventing him from fighting at full strength. He was irritated. However, the bridge did not collapse. Instead of broken columns, it was now supported by 2 blue pillars of mana. Someone else joined the battle. Kang Hyun-chul looked up and thought that help had arrived just in time to prevent his shoes from getting wet. A helicopter hovered over the bridge, and the throne shouted words of gratitude at the top of its lungs, addressing it. The girl, whom he for some reason called Holy Mother, stood in the doorway and was indignant that she was not yet old enough to be called by such a name. It was one of the 12, Park Hyo-rim. She shouted to her partner that they had offered to take him to the crash site in a helicopter, so why run to the bridge on his own? The man cheerfully raised his finger and said that he urgently needed to get to Seoul. He had a specific sense of humor. The girl asked him to just focus on the Kraken now. Reinforcements were supposed to arrive soon, and then they would deal with the civilians. She cast a protective field on Hyun-chul and also buffed him quite strongly. The man clearly didn't like it. Kang yelled that he didn't need her buffs, but Park Hyo-rim retorted that he was in no position to show off. Following the helicopter as it flew away, the fire demon shouted that these children were now outside his area of responsibility. Yunha hugged his sister closer to him. He was glad that he wouldn't have to deal with his old enemy again. Park Hyo-rim replied to Hyun-chul that she knew and would take care of it. The girl carefully looked at the boy with the girl in his arms. At this time, huge diverging circles appeared on the water surface again. The Kraken slowly rose to the surface. Now his eyes glowing with red fire became visible. Another second, and the tentacles would again begin to destroy everything around. On the bridge in front of the giant monster stood several tiny figures, a boy holding his sister in his arms, and a man who intended to defeat the monster in the next couple of minutes. Joyfully exclaiming that his target was finally accessible again, Kang Hyun-chul rushed forward. He pushed off from the edge of the bridge debris with all his might and jumped straight onto the Kraken's head to deal with it quickly. In the process, the throne became completely engulfed in flames and now looked like a small flame in comparison to the size of the monster. It seemed that the fire demon was now entirely made of flame. There was absolutely nothing human left in his image. He advanced on the Kraken with such determination that the monster did not even risk attacking, but simply froze and watched the enemy. Somehow, Hyun-chul was able to simply walk on the surface of the water without sinking into it. Perhaps the only thing that got wet near the throne was the boots. There were only a few meters left to the Kraken. Finally, the monster came out of its stupor and began to move, raising its giant tentacles for a crushing blow. At that very moment, the throne's sword simply cut off several tentacles at once, saving the owner from having to dodge. A whole ball of flame formed around the fire demon, which also protected him from any attempts by the Kraken to attack. Hyunchul was pleased with himself and the result of his actions. He understood that victory was almost in his pocket. Calling the monster a weakling, the throne turned into a fiery comet and dealt its first blow to the Kraken's head. He then jumped and cut off a few more of the monster's tentacles, making it difficult to see what exactly was happening because of the fire. Everything was burning, Hyunchul himself, his clothes, his sword, his footprint. His opponent was also burning, and the latter was actually receiving significant damage from the flames. The Kraken was dying. Its eyes were still open, but instead of an angry red glow, they now showed despair and suffering. The fire demon reduced the amount of flame and placed the sword on his shoulder. He needed to evaluate the result of his actions. The children also looked at the Kraken. Behind the figure of the throne, they could only see that the monster was blazing with fire and that it was seriously wounded. Yunha realized that the Kraken was defeated, and without hiding his joy, told his sister about it. He had truly managed to change the future. Park Hyo-rim ran to the children as fast as she could. The first thing the girl did was call out to the children and ask if everything was okay. The throne slammed her staff onto the asphalt and announced that she would quickly heal their wounds using healing magic. Imagine her surprise when it turned out that neither the boy nor the girl had a single scratch. Yunha looked at the girl with apprehension. He didn't know what to expect from her yet, but just in case he decided to be on guard. Remembering the pillar of light that appeared on the bridge before Hyunchul arrived, Park Hyo-rim realized that it was most likely a gift of a miracle that completely healed the children's wounds, and she was amazed. Hyo-rim wanted to reach out and touch the girl. She had never seen a miracle or someone who possessed this gift before. Yunha didn't allow her to do this, angrily shouting at the girl not to dare touch his sister. The boy's gaze was full of confidence and strength, completely untypical of an ordinary child, but then he was not ordinary. Hyo-rim felt it. She realized that it wasn't just the girl that was interesting. The boy had no less potential. No one had threatened her so openly for a long time. The girl did not expect that the child could threaten like that, and began to wonder who he was. It was not possible to get an answer right away. Helicopters appeared, which meant that the children would be immediately evacuated from the bridge to the hospital. Pak received a message that a rescue team was ready to lift the boy and girl on board. It was dangerous to remain on the bridge. Yunha felt a huge sense of relief. For some reason, when communicating with the thrones, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was putting himself and his sister in danger. The TV news announcer announced that around 5 p.m., a Kraken had suddenly attacked the Seongsan Bridge, causing many casualties among civilians and players. The presenter added that search and debris removal are still ongoing, so it is not yet possible to give the exact number of dead and injured. The government commented on the tragedy, but Yunha did not listen any further. He was in the hospital and waiting for information about his sister's condition. The hero was also interested in what was going on with his parents, but Yuna was still little, and therefore he had to worry about her first and foremost. The girl was lying on the bed, dressed in a hospital gown. Her eyes were closed, her eyelids trembling slightly. A nurse came up and said that the doctor assessed the child's condition as stable. She had a mana deficiency, but after using the potion, everything would return to normal quite quickly. The boy remembered how it was the last time, when his dad, mom, and sister did not survive. Perhaps it was his worst memory. Now Yunha was practically happy. He changed the future, everything ended well, Yuna did not die, and apparently her parents did not either. The boy put his hand to Yuna's forehead. It was no longer as cold as on the bridge. The girl's strength was gradually returning. The potion began to work. Then the boy heard someone call his name. He tensed up. There was a lot of anxiety and fear in his voice. He didn't need to look back. It was his father. He was angry and worried at the same time. Such a tone did not bode well. But Yunha still turned around and saw how the parents quickly but carefully walked into Yuna's room. Their faces were frightened. The father was ready to start screaming out of anger at his son's recklessness. He was holding back with all his might. His lips were trembling. The mother tried to calm her husband down a little. Yunha realized that a huge scandal could break out now. If it weren't for Yuna, who was sleeping, he would have received a hefty scolding. The boy decided that he was finished. He lowered his head and prepared to listen to reproaches and lectures from his parents. Instead, his mother asked him in an anxious voice if he was hurt, how he was feeling, and if he was very scared. The boy timidly muttered that everything seemed to be fine with him. He was afraid to raise his eyes to his parents. Father asked what was wrong with Yuna, and no Yunha replied that she had too little mana left, but the doctors had already corrected it by using the necessary potion, and now the little sister was sleeping. The father sighed with relief. It seemed as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The boy continued to stand with his head down. He braced himself for what was inevitable, and then his father reproachfully asked why Yunha had disobeyed him and his mother and run away. The boy could not think of anything better to do than simply ask for forgiveness. He understood that in the eyes of his parents he was very guilty before them and Yuna. But then Yunhu had a thought. Is an apology really necessary? After all, he saved his family. This is the best outcome that could possibly happen. Our hero thought that he didn't regret at all that he disobeyed. The boy smiled at this thought. The main thing is that his father doesn't notice it. The parents continued to look menacingly at their son, and he pretended that he was really very guilty. Since you are in the body of a child, you need to behave like a child. But then our hero looked closely at his father again. He was so worried about his children that he seemed to have aged 15 years. Looking at his mother, Yunha noted that exactly the same thing had happened to her. The young woman looked deeply tormented by her experiences. Now the boy understood how much health his prank cost his parents, because they did not know that he was living a second life and saved them from certain death. The hero realized that the only thing his parents cared about was that their son had disobeyed and run towards the Kraken, putting himself in danger. He knew exactly what it was like to lose his family, so he didn't hesitate for a second and didn't ask their opinion. Now he had to become a child again, so Yunha looked at his father, cried, and asked for forgiveness. The boy added that he was wrong, fully aware of it and promising never to do anything like that again. No one yelled or scolded him. The mother stretched out her arms to her son and invited him into her gentle and affectionate embrace. Yunha threw himself on her neck and was happier than he had ever been in his life, both in this life and in the previous one. Could the future really be happy this time? The hero couldn't believe his happiness. The father also hugged him and his wife. He quickly calmed down because he loved Yunhu very much, so he simply asked her never to do that again. Yunha started to cry for real. He didn't have to fight monsters anymore. He could be an ordinary child. The next morning, Yunhee's family returned to the hospital to take Yuna home. The girl had already completely recovered. The father asked the boy in a stern voice to sit in the room and not go anywhere while he and his mother filled out all the necessary paperwork. Yuna raised his hand happily and promised that he would wait for them by Yuna's bed without moving from the spot. Our hero thought that after the events on the bridge, his parents had completely stopped trusting him, and he wished it would end soon. Yuna continued to sleep. Her eyes were still closed, but a blush had already appeared on her cheeks. Yunha sat next to his sister's bed and ate cookies. These were the simple childhood joys that he had previously lacked so much. Having finished the last piece, the boy even wanted to lick his finger. It was very tasty, but the treat was too small. Looking around, our hero was convinced that there was nothing else tasty in the ward. He desperately wanted something sweet, probably because he had spent a lot of energy the previous day. Then someone handed him another chocolate chip cookie, and Yunha was delighted. He thanked them with all his heart for the treat. But then the hero looked at who was holding out the cookies. It was Kang Hyun Chul. For some reason, the boy suddenly lost his desire for sweets. Raising his hands in a questioning gesture, Yunha seemed to be asking what the throne had forgotten in his sister's chamber and why he was treating him. The man began to remove the wrapper. He did not understand why the child did not take the sweet and asked if he liked chocolate cookies. The next moment, the head of the Blade clan simply shoved the treat straight into Yunha's mouth. He rarely dealt with children at all, so he simply didn't know how to behave. Our hero held the cookie in his teeth and thought that his enemy from his past life was probably dying. Or maybe he had gone crazy. No, he had always been crazy. But how to explain such behavior? Here the man decided to break the silence once again and asked how old Yunhei was. He spoke to him in a serious tone, as if he were an adult. The boy finally took the cookie in his hand and began to eat it. After chewing a piece, he replied that he had recently turned 6. The throne exhaled that the child turned out to be really, really small and asked how old his sister was. Yunha answered that it was 10. Hyunchul asked about his name, and our hero was indignant that he was not obliged to tell him his sister's name. The man laughed and said that he was not interested in the girl's name, but in the name of the boy with whom he now had the honor of speaking. But Yunha introduced himself. He did not understand what all these questions were for and what the fire demon wanted. But soon, everything became clear. The Blade Lord asked if no Yunha wanted to join the player academy in the future. If so, he could confidently count on his recommendation. Yunha was horrified. This guy wanted to put him in the academy to make him a player and then measure his strength. Did he decide to grow his own opponents? The hero thought. The man put his hand on the boy's shoulder and said that he still had plenty of time to think. Hyunchul smiled and said that he would definitely remember the hero, no Yunha. He was almost sure that they would meet again. The throne turned around and left the chamber. Park Hyo-rim was waiting for him at the door. She realized that they had failed to agree on admission to the academy. The girl pounced on her colleague with questions about how he could just turn around and leave. She was almost certain that one of the children had the gift of miracles, a gift no one had had for many years. Hyunchul replied that he didn't care much about that. It only mattered whether the children were strong or not. Hyerim called him an idiot who was obsessed with fighting, but the man pretended not to hear. He turned and reminded her that she must not forget that firstly, he was older, and secondly, she had become the throne, and now she must think very carefully about her words and actions. Hyunchul added that if the child really does have the gift of a miracle, the girl's life will turn into a living hell when the general public finds out about it, so there is no point in ruining her life at such a young age. The man looked closely into Park Hyo-rim's eyes and asked if she wanted this. The girl realized that she had spoken too quickly and remained silent. Continuing to walk down the corridor, the throne summed up that if she understood him, then she should forget about all this, after which he suggested going to a cafe and ordering dessert. The beauty instantly imagined a carousel of ice cream, burgers, and candies. She herself wanted to have some refreshment, but the moment was not particularly suitable. Hyerim again called her friend crazy. Hyunchul ordered once again to forget about the girl. At least for a few years, it was much better to go and eat than to say anything. Before leaving the hospital, the man muttered under his breath that he really wanted something sweet. He had spent a lot of energy yesterday. The next day, after being discharged from the hospital, Yoonhee's family finally went to visit her grandmother, who lived in a small village a few hours' drive from the city. The old woman met them at the door of the house, which raised alarming questions about whether she could go out after fainting. The grandmother smiled and said that she came out only to meet them. She was very impatient to see her grandchildren. She looked at her daughter, her husband, and children, and was upset to see that they looked worn out and tired. Yunha and Yuna were sleeping in the back seat and didn't even wake up. The woman suggested that they continue to rest, but in the house. But Yunha opened his eyes and realized that he was no longer sleeping in the car, but under the blanket. Yuna pressed tightly against him, hugging her little brother in her sleep. Our hero was so tightly squeezed by loving embraces that he was afraid to even move, so as not to wake the girl. But the boy still couldn't sleep in that position. He carefully rolled his sister a little to the side and sat down, wondering how she could even sleep in such an uncomfortable position. Then he looked at how his mother hugged his father just as tightly in her sleep and realized who Yuna took after. Yunha stood up carefully and covered Yuna with a blanket so that she wouldn't freeze. He was wide awake. The boy quietly tiptoed out of the room, trying not to wake anyone, and then closed the door. He went out into the yard. The nature in this area was extremely beautiful and peaceful, giving a feeling of peace. Our hero sat down and tried to collect his thoughts. His feelings were quite strange, but Yunha noticed that he now had much more mana than he had in his previous life. He wondered if it was related to his gift, because as a player he was very strong and, one might say, unique. It is rare for someone to have the gift of a berserker, but Yunha has mastered it to perfection. One cannot say that it was because of a good life, but rather from a burning desire to take revenge on the monsters for his family. At that time, the pattern was simple. The more mana he consumed, the stronger he became, but he could not accumulate energy in large quantities, turning everything into strength. The strength was great. Our hero cut down monsters literally with one blow, rarely requiring an additional one. The name itself suggested that his gift caused a real obsession with battle. The more mana the player consumed, the more insane he became. Yunha thought about how, despite the peculiarities of his gift, when he used adult skills in a child's body, his mind remained completely clear. He fought the Kraken. He even cut through a truck flying at him, but he didn't experience the rage that usually overwhelmed him in battles before the regression. If now this payment for the gift is missing, then perhaps he still doesn't know everything he should about berserkers. Then he heard a gentle voice. The grandmother was asking why the boy was not sleeping, but Yunha did not even notice when she approached. The woman sat down next to her grandson and smiled warmly at him. She was still as loving and caring as the hero remembered her. He replied that he had slept well in the car, to which he received advice to sleep well if he wanted to grow up faster. Yunha thought that every time he was lost in thought in his past life, he imagined his grandmother next to him. And now she's sitting next to him again, waiting for her grandson to start the conversation first. If he wants to, it doesn't matter to her whether it's about problems, about feelings, or just about some nonsense. The boy looked tenderly at his grandmother and asked why she herself didn't sleep. Because when you're sick, you also need rest. The woman laughed and simply said that if he couldn't sleep, she couldn't either. Yunha snorted. It was true. That's how it always happened. Then a very pleasant thought struck him. Our hero smiled and felt happy again. As an adult, he always wanted his grandmother to be around, and it seems like in his new life, there's a chance that it will be like that if his parents take better care of her now. The woman looked at her grandson and asked if he wanted some warm milk. The boy waved his hands. Refusing, Yunha did not want to cause her trouble. Here he heard a clarifying question. Whether he really didn't want it, it was his mother, who quietly woke up, warmed up the milk, and brought it into the yard. She pointed at the cups and asked with a smile who would then drink what she had prepared.